Merry Christmas Eve.
Yeah.
I bet you weren't expecting a deep dive into critical thinking today.
Right.
But hey, sometimes the best gifts are a total surprise, right?
Yeah, I agree.
So we are going to be looking at critical thinking skills for dummies.
Okay.
And this book, it really busts the myth that critical thinking is just for like academics and professors,
Right.
It's really for anyone
You do
who's
go-
just curious about the world and wants to kind of sharpen their thinking skills.
Absolutely. It's like having a mental toolkit, right?
Yes.
To help navigate the flood of information and opinions that we're just bombarded with every day.
Totally. And the book starts by diving into how our brains think, and it turns out we have two modes of thought.
Okay.
Fast and slow.
Uh-huh.
And they use this fun little brain teaser to illustrate this.
Okay.
The egg yolk question. Are you ready for this?
I think so.
All right. Should you say the yolk of the egg is white or the yolk of the egg are white? Did you catch the trick?
It's interesting because I think our brains love to take those shortcuts.
Yeah.
You see egg yolk, and it's something that we're very familiar with.
Right.
So we jump to the verb agreement without actually thinking about the meaning.
Yeah.
Like we're just on autopilot.
It totally got me. I was like, oh, yeah, of course it's R.
Uh-huh.
And the book connects this to the work of Daniel Kahneman, who talks about cognitive biases. Have you heard of the Linda problem?
Yes, it's a classic.
Oh, tell me about it.
So basically it's a study, and it shows how our intuition
Okay.
can lead us to conclusions that are statistically improbable.
Okay.
So participants are given this description of Linda, and she sounds like somebody who would be active in social justice movements.
Okay.
And then they're asked, is it more likely that Linda is a bank teller or that she's a bank teller and active in the feminist movement?
Oh, so most people say the second one, right?
Exactly.
Because it just feels like it fits.
Yeah. And here's the thing, though, statistically,
Yeah.
it's far more likely for someone to just be a bank teller. By adding the feminist element,
Right.
you're actually making the
Yep.
probability lower,
Oh, wow.
even though it seems to align with our initial impression of her.
So what's the takeaway there? I feel like it's kind of a warning to not just go with your gut feeling all the time.
It is. And Kahneman's research actually goes on to explain
Okay.
that our brains operate on two systems.
Uh-huh.
System one is fast, intuitive, and emotional.
Okay.
That's the one that jumps to conclusions.
Right.
System two is much slower,
Mm-hmm.
more deliberate and logical.
Okay.
And that's really what critical thinking is all about, is engaging that system too.
So kind of like pausing
Yes,
before you just go with what feels right.
precisely looking at the evidence and slowing down.
So we need to train our brains to kind of hit the pause button more often.
Yes, exactly. It's like building a muscle.
Okay.
The more you do it, the better you get at it.
I like it. I like it. Now, the book uses another interesting analogy comparing critical thinking to puzzle solving.
They talk about that aha moment.
Yeah.
When you solve a puzzle or untangle a really complex argument.
And it's so satisfying.
It is.
Like when you finally get it.
Right. And they also talk about the power of analogies
Yeah.
and how they help us understand complex ideas.
Do you have a favorite example of that? Like where an analogy really illuminates a concept?
Well, think about happiness.
Okay.
We all talk about it, but what does it actually mean?
Right.
How is happiness in a long-term relationship?
Okay.
Different from happiness that we might feel from like a fleeting moment of joy
Right.
or material wealth versus strong social connections.
Right.
Analogies help us unpack these different facets.
But comparing them to something we already get.
Exactly.
It's like using a familiar landmark
Yeah.
to navigate through unfamiliar territory.
I like that.
But the book also cautions against the dangers of false analogies.
It can be tricky.
Yes.
A false analogy can actually mislead us
Right.
instead of illuminating an issue.
What's an example of that?
Well, those misleading product comparisons we see in advertising,
Okay.
you might see a commercial claiming that a brand of toothpaste is like a shield for your teeth.
Yeah.
Sounds impressive, right?
Right.
But it's implying a level of protection that may not be supported by science.
So it's like analogies are powerful tools, but we have to handle them with care.
Yes.
Yeah.
You have to make sure the comparisons actually hold up.
Now, the book takes a little bit of a darker turn when it explores propaganda and how it can be used to manipulate our emotions.
Yeah.
They bring up Hitler's Mein Kampf as an example.
Yes. It's a reminder of how powerful language can be,
Yeah.
even when used for terrible purposes.
Yeah.
And the book analyzes some of the techniques that Hitler used,
Like what?
particularly his focus on emotional appeals and catchy slogans,
Okay.
rather than reasoned arguments.
And unfortunately, those tactics are not just a thing of the past, right?
No,
Don't we see similar things happening today?
All the time,
Like where?
especially online.
Hmm?
I think about the way information is presented.
Right.
Politicians, advertisers, they often use these same tactics
Yeah.
to influence our opinions and choices.
Okay.
They might use emotionally charged language, present bias statistics.
Hmm.
They might even create straw man arguments
What's that?
to discredit opposing viewpoints.
So how do we protect ourselves from being manipulated?
Well, it comes down to being vigilant
Okay.
and recognizing those manipulative tactics.
So when we see something, especially if it triggers like a strong emotional response,
Right. Step back.
yeah.
Ask yourself, what evidence supports this claim?
Okay.
Is this an appeal to logic, or is this an attempt to play on my feelings?
So it's like developing a built-in BS detector.
Exactly.
Awesome. Okay, now this next part is a bit of a head scratcher for me.
Okay.
The book talks about groupthink and information cascades and how these social forces can shape our beliefs without us even realizing it.
Uh-huh.
What are those things?
Well, groupthink happens when a group prioritizes harmony and avoids conflict,
Okay.
to the point that they fail to really evaluate their decisions. It can lead to some disastrous consequences because everybody just goes along with the group,
Yeah,
even if it's based on like bad logic or incomplete information.
got it.
Information cascades are a bit different.
Okay.
They occur when people make decisions
Okay.
based on what they see others doing,
Okay.
regardless of their own information or beliefs.
So it's like following the herd even if you don't know where they're going.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
And it can have a huge impact on how information spreads online.
Uh-huh.
The book uses the example of the myth surrounding the dangers of fatty foods.
Okay.
This idea became widely accepted based on some early research,
Right.
but later studies have shown that the relationship between fat and heart health is much more complex.
So for years, people were avoiding fat like the plague
Yeah,
just because of this initial cascade.
exactly.
But it wasn't the full picture.
Right, and that's why it's so important to be wary of those information cascades.
Yeah.
Just because an idea is popular
Right.
doesn't make it true.
We have to dig deeper and question the sources and consider different perspectives.
Now get ready for this one. The book actually endorses doodling
I know.
as a critical thinking tool.
It sounds counterintuitive.
It really does.
But research suggests that doodling can activate different parts of the brain.
So it's not just mindless scribbling.
Right. And it can lead to new connections and insights.
Wow, so there's actually something cognitive happening there.
Yes.
That's really interesting. It's like I can see how sometimes our brains need a break
yes.
from all that linear focused thinking.
Right.
And doodling kind of gives you that mental playground
Exactly.
where your mind can wander and make those connections.
Yeah, it's like you're tapping into your subconscious
Yeah,
to contribute to the problem-solving process.
that's cool. So next time I'm stuck on a problem, I'm just going to doodle
You should.
and see what happens.
I'll be surprised.
I love that. So the book also explores the art of rhetoric, which is basically how language can be used to persuade.
It's like having a toolbox
It is.
of persuasive techniques
Yeah.
at your disposal.
Right. Rhetoric is all about understanding how to use words effectively to influence others.
Do you have a favorite example of a rhetorical technique?
Well, the book breaks down a bunch of them, but one of them is the power of speaking in triples.
Okay.
You've probably noticed this in speeches and advertising,
Yeah.
like faster, better, stronger,
Yeah.
reduce wrinkles, improve elasticity, enhance radiance.
It's everywhere.
It's everywhere, and it works.
Why?
Well, it creates a sense of rhythm, and it makes the information more memorable.
I can see that.
Mm.
Another tactic they highlight is conducting arguments via questions,
Yes.
which I feel like can be used to kind of subtly guide the listener toward a particular conclusion.
Right. It's like leading the witness.
Yeah.
And it brings up a really important point.
What's that?
Recognizing these tactics so we don't fall prey to them.
Okay.
When we understand how language can be used to persuade,
Yeah.
we can better evaluate the validity of the arguments that are being presented to us.
It's like having a mental shield
Yeah.
against the Jedi mind tricks.
Exactly. You know what they're trying to do.
But you're not going to let them control your thoughts.
Exactly.
That's awesome. The last point I want to bring up from this section is their emphasis on real-world arguments.
Yes,
They make it clear that real-life arguments are messy.
they are.
They rarely resemble those perfect examples you
Right.
see in textbooks.
They're full of nuances.
Yeah.
Emotions run high. Hidden assumptions are lurking.
Right.
Logical fallacies abound.
It's not a clean-cut battle
It's not.
of logic.
It's more like untangling a knot.
That's been tied by a dozen different people,
Yes.
each with their own agenda. So how do we even approach that?
Well, the book offers some good strategies
Okay.
for dissecting those arguments.
Like what?
Well, they highlight the importance of identifying hidden assumptions,
Okay.
understanding cause and effect relationships, and recognizing the role of link terms.
Link terms. What are those?
They're the words and phrases
Okay.
that connect the different parts of an argument
Okay.
and show the relationship
Yeah.
between the premises and the conclusion.
Okay.
So words like because, therefore, however, consequently.
Oh, so they're like the structural beams
Yeah,
in a building.
I like that.
If the link terms are weak,
The whole argument can collapse.
this has really given me a whole new way to think about
That's power
how I approach these conversations and debates.
of critical thinking.
This is awesome. This is already giving me so much to think about.
Good.
And we've only just scratched the surface. But before we dive into the next part, I want to take a moment to kind of let all of this sink in.
Yeah.
Have you ever noticed yourself falling prey to any of these thinking traps?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Like which ones?
I think we all have our own biases
Yeah.
that we have to be aware of.
Right.
And sometimes I catch myself jumping to conclusions or following the crowd
Yeah.
without really thinking critically about the information.
So how do you think this knowledge can help us in our everyday lives?
Well, I think it gives us a framework for making better decisions
Okay.
and navigating a world that's just saturated with information and opinions.
Yeah.
It's about being more discerning,
Right.
more thoughtful, and ultimately more in control of our own beliefs and actions.
I love that. That's a great way to put it.
Thanks. It's fascinating how these mental shortcuts can really trip us up, right?
Yeah.
The book goes on to discuss how our brains just crave certainty,
Okay.
and that this can sometimes lead us to favor stereotypes over statistics. So we might cling to these generalizations
Yeah.
even when the data tells a different story.
It's like our brains are trying to simplify a complex world,
Right.
but sometimes those simplifications can lead us astray. Do
Exactly.
you think that has anything to do with those cognitive biases that we were talking about?
It's definitely connected. Remember
Yeah.
confirmation bias? That's our tendency to seek out information that confirms our existing beliefs.
Right.
And to ignore evidence that contradicts them.
Yeah.
It's powerful, and it can really contribute to prejudice and discrimination.
So it's like we're building these mental walls around our beliefs,
Yeah.
and it's hard to see beyond them.
Exactly. And that's why critical thinking is so important.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that our worldview is just one interpretation of reality,
Right.
and that we might be wrong.
That's a tough one.
It is.
Admitting that we might be wrong.
But it's part of being a critical thinker.
Yeah.
Being humble enough to acknowledge that you don't have all the answers.
Critical thinking isn't about being right all the time, is it?
No. It's about constantly learning, adapting,
Yeah.
refining our thinking as we encounter new information.
Speaking of new information,
Yes.
the book also touches on the limitations of scientific knowledge. They argue that science is always evolving,
It is.
which means that what we consider a fact today might be revised or even overturned tomorrow.
Exactly. They use the example of paradigm shifts in science.
Okay.
These are moments when long-held theories are challenged
Uh-huh.
and replaced by new models of understanding.
Okay, so give me an example of that.
Well, think about the shift from a geocentric view of the universe,
Okay.
where everything revolves around the Earth,
Right.
to a heliocentric view.
Where the Earth revolves around the sun.
Exactly. That was a major paradigm shift.
So even scientists need to be critical thinkers.
They do.
They can't just accept everything they've been taught.
Science is a process of ongoing inquiry,
Yeah.
not a collection of unchanging truths.
So it's like questioning assumptions,
Yes.
testing hypotheses, being open to new evidence,
Exactly.
even if it challenges what's already accepted.
That's critical thinking.
That's actually kind of liberating.
It is.
It means there's always more to learn.
Yeah.
We're not stuck with one set of knowledge.
The world is full of mysteries,
Uh-huh.
and critical thinking gives us the tools to explore them.
I like that. Now I found this next section really fascinating.
Okay.
The book dives into the psychology of persuasion
Yep.
and how our emotions can be used to influence our decisions.
Uh-huh. It's important to recognize emotional appeals in arguments.
Yeah.
Sometimes, instead of providing solid evidence,
Yeah.
people try to sway us by tapping into our fears, our desires, our sense of belonging.
Like those ads that try to make you feel insecure
Exactly.
about your appearance.
Yes.
Or your social status.
To sell you something.
They're playing on your emotions.
Yeah.
Rather than appealing to your reason.
And the book actually gives some strategies.
Oh, that's good.
For identifying these tactics.
Okay.
And evaluating their legitimacy.
So, like, what kinds of questions should we be asking ourselves?
Ask yourself, is this emotional appeal justified?
Okay.
Or is this manipulation
designed
to bypass my critical thinking?
So don't let your heart rule your head completely.
Right? Emotions are part of who we are, but we need to be aware of how they can be used to influence us.
Especially when we're making big decisions.
Yes.
Now, this next part gets a little philosophical.
Right.
The book explores the relationship between knowledge information and data. They talk about how data is the raw material, the building blocks of understanding.
Right.
Information is data that's been organized and interpreted.
You can get meaning.
And knowledge is the integration of that information into a framework that allows us to understand and apply concepts.
It's a hierarchy of understanding.
It is, and the book emphasizes the importance of critical thinking at each stage.
Right.
So how is that data being collected?
Yeah.
What biases might be influencing the interpretation?
Exactly.
Is this knowledge being presented objectively?
Those are all good questions.
It's about questioning every step of the process.
It is.
From the raw data to the conclusions.
And that's critical thinking.
Wow, that's a lot to keep in mind.
It is, but it's crucial for developing a discerning and informed perspective.
Now the book gets even more meta. They introduce this framework for assessing your own thinking skills.
They call it thinking spheres.
Okay.
It represents different domains of critical thinking.
Okay.
The logical sphere, the creative sphere, the strategic sphere, and the communicative sphere.
So it's like breaking down critical thinking into these core components.
Exactly. And the book encourages you to reflect on your strengths and weaknesses.
In each one.
Yes. Are you a natural logician who can just dissect arguments?
Okay.
Or are you more of a creative thinker who sees connections that others miss?
It's like figuring out your critical thinking style.
Yeah, and once you understand your strengths, you can leverage them more effectively.
Right, and if you find areas where you're less confident,
Yeah.
you can focus on developing those skills.
It's like leveling up your critical thinking stats.
I love that. It's about being proactive.
Yeah.
Taking charge of your own cognitive development.
That's the goal.
That leads perfectly into the next section, which focuses on honing your listening skills.
It's a big one.
The book argues that good listening is crucial.
It is.
For critical thinking.
Active listening.
What's that?
It's not enough to just hear the words.
Okay.
You need to engage with the ideas.
Uh-huh.
Question the assumptions. Connect that new information to your existing knowledge.
So you're like a participant in the conversation.
Yes.
Not just a passive observer.
Exactly. And the book offers some tips for improving your listening skills.
Oh, like what?
Taking notes.
Okay.
Asking clarifying questions.
Uh-huh.
Summarizing the key points in your own words.
These are great skills to have, not just for school, but just for life.
Yes, they are.
Whether you're listening to a lecture, a podcast,
Right.
a conversation with a friend.
Being an active listener helps you understand the information better.
Totally. Now I think it's time to switch gears a little bit.
Okay.
And delve into the book's exploration of critical thinking and writing.
When it comes to writing the book, really stresses the importance of structure and clarity, like organizing your thoughts logically, using clear language and backing up your claims with solid evidence.
It's like building an argument piece by piece.
Yeah.
Making sure everything fits together.
That's a great way to think about it.
They also talk about the importance of knowing your audience when you're writing.
Uh-huh.
Why is that so important?
Well, think about it. You wouldn't explain a complex scientific concept to a 5-year-old the same way you would to a college professor. Understanding your audience helps you tailor your language and arguments to their level of understanding.
So it's about meeting your audience where they are.
Yes.
Making sure your message is clear and relevant.
Exactly. The book gives some tips for analyzing your audience.
Okay.
And crafting a message that resonates with them.
So it's like anticipating their questions, addressing their concerns, presenting information in a way that's both clear and engaging.
Exactly.
Now let's talk about evidence.
Okay.
The book delves into the art of using evidence effectively in your writing.
It all starts with choosing credible sources.
Okay.
Whether you're using academic research, expert testimony, or statistical data, you have to evaluate the reliability of your sources.
It's like being a detective, gathering clues and piecing together a case.
Exactly. You need to back up your claims with solid evidence.
And the book also gives guidance on how to properly cite your sources.
Yes.
Avoid plagiarism. Present evidence in a clear and convincing way.
That's important.
Now, this next part I found interesting.
Okay.
The book talks about using rhetorical devices in writing, but cautions against relying too heavily on them.
Right.
Why is that?
Well, rhetorical devices like metaphors, similes, analogies, they can be powerful tools.
Okay.
They can make your writing more impactful.
Yeah.
Make your arguments more memorable.
But
if you overuse them, your writing can start to sound a little bit too flowery or even manipulative.
It's all about balance.
It is.
Yeah.
Use them strategically to enhance your writing. But don't let them overshadow the substance.
Right. The core of your argument should still be there.
Exactly.
Now, the book ends with a really thought-provoking question.
Oh, yeah?
They ask, if you had to choose, would you rather be right or would you rather be persuasive?
That's a tough one.
It is.
Gets to the heart of the relationship between truth and persuasion.
Yeah. In a perfect world, we'd always be both right and persuasive.
Right.
But the book acknowledges that it's not always that simple.
It's not.
So how do we reconcile that tension?
It's a question we all have to grapple with.
Yeah.
There are no easy answers.
Right.
But I think by understanding those principles of critical thinking, recognizing the power of persuasion, being mindful of our own biases, we can try to make informed choices and contribute to a more reasonable and just world.
It's like a call to action.
It is.
To use our critical thinking skills, not just to win arguments, but to actually make a difference in the world.
Exactly. Critical thinking is not just an academic exercise.
Right.
It's a tool for understanding ourselves, navigating a complex world, and building a better future.
Well, on that note, I think we'll wrap up our deep dive into critical thinking. I know it's a bit unconventional for Christmas Eve.
Yeah.
But hopefully it's given you some food for thought.
A mental feast.
Exactly. And as you gather with loved ones this holiday season, maybe you can share some of these insights.
I like that.
You might even spark a lively debate over dessert.
Just remember to keep it civil.
Good point. Even the most skilled critical thinkers can get carried away sometimes.
Oh, it's true.
All right, so to all our listeners, happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
May your new year be filled with critical thinking and insightful conversations.